This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market assets rose today as demand for riskier assets picked up due to a slowdown in the number of new coronavirus cases. But of course, analysts are still warning that the optimism could be overstated. Still, MSCI's index for emerging market stocks rose 0.7% today following 2 days of declines. On the continent, South Africa's JSE was firmer, taking its lead from stronger US and Asian markets, with of course banks faring best today. They rose 0.5% on the day. Financials were also up 0.33%. Platinum miners down 0.15%, and of course the gold index worst faring down 1.62% today. Now, also coming up on today's show, the World Bank chides other banks for lending to African nations too easily, and the African Union delays security funding to mobilize resources. We keep an eye on China as the country battles to contain the deadly coronavirus. Now, World Bank President David Malpass has chided other development banks for lending too quickly, too heavily to indebted countries. Now, he says some are helping to worsen already challenging debt situations. According to Malpass, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development are contributing to debt problems. He pointed to the Asian Development Bank for pushing billions of dollars into a fiscally challenging situation in Pakistan, and the African Development Bank for doing the same in Nigeria and South Africa. The Manila-based development lender in December approved $1.3 billion in loans for Pakistan, including $1 billion for immediate budget support to shore up the country's public finances and $300 million to help reform the country's energy sector. Of course, we'll keep an eye on that story for you, and we'll bring reactions in subsequent bulletins. Well, let's move on now. The African Union has agreed not to start financing security operations from a new fund until 2023, and that's because it has received fewer contributions than it hoped. The AU, which groups 55 African nations, had hoped to start tapping into that fund this year for peacekeeping missions, mediation, and conflict prevention. But at the end of a summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, it emerged that the AU had less than half of the targeted $400 million. The failure to secure as much funding as planned is a new setback to security hopes in Africa's vast Sahel region. Now, it also follows a drawdown of AU peacekeepers in Somalia as external donors reduce funding, aiming to transfer responsibility to Somali forces. AU nations have so far raised only $164 million. And of course, South African national Wamkele Mene is expected to take up his position as head of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Ghana this March. AU heads of state voted to confirm his appointment on Monday, with South Africa prevailing against aggressive lobbying from Nigeria for its preferred candidate. Now, until his appointment, Mene was the chief director of Africa Economic Relations in South Africa's Trade and Industry Ministry for about 4 years. Wamkele led South Africa's negotiations on the CFTA, and he'll now take charge of the implementation of an ambitious free trade agreement from the CFTA's headquarters in Accra, Ghana. Now, the trade deal came into force in May 2019 after 24 countries formally ratified it. Trading under the CFTA rules should begin on the 1st of July 2020. Negotiations on rules to govern trade within the CFTA are still ongoing. At least 28 AU member states have ratified the treaty so far, which of course will create the biggest free trade area in the world once it's operational. Eritrea so far is the only African nation to not sign the CFTA treaty. Well, let's take a closer look at the man and, of course, the road ahead for South Africa's Wamkele Mene. We're now joined by economic analyst Chris Hart. He joins us in Johannesburg. Mr. Hart, great to have you on the show. Now, of course, Mene faces a huge task ahead of him, implementing what is essentially the world's largest trade deal. What are your thoughts on what should be his biggest priorities right now?
I think the first thing is to establish a credible secretariat, but it's also to actually try and get the countries that have not ratified the agreement but are signatories to the agreement to also join in, because I think the important thing for the trade area to really work is to be able to ensure that areas contiguous are in fact connected, because there's going to be land routes and sea routes, etc. So it doesn't help, for instance, to have, for instance, South Africa ratifying it and Kenya ratifying it and belonging to it, but the area between the two countries is not ratified. You want the trades and goods and services to be able to travel as freely as possible without having to avoid, jurisdictions that sit in the middle. I think it's also important to actually demonstrate quite quickly that this free trade agreement actually will in fact benefit, that it actually does, with a larger market, it actually provides a far stronger basis to provide an industrial incentive for that has economies of scale that can actually supply the market. And it's that economic growth and the investment in infrastructure that goes with it to move the goods and services across the continent that needs to be able to spur growth. But it's important that it also is seen to benefit local communities, and that it's not a top-down type of thing, but actually can spur some bottom-up growth. In other words, that it's seen to be relevant to people that, from a point of view in years to come, that people will look back and say, we were very glad to belong to this, and that countries aren't tempted to pull out for populist reasons. There's two forces at work. There's a strong nationalism type of identity that you can see in for instance, in countries like the US and many other nationalist type of routes that are actually going. You also see it in Africa, and it's difficult to balance that against policies that are quite pan-African in nature. And so one needs to be able to satisfy the national aspirations as well as satisfying the actual natural benefits that can stem from a more African point of view.
Right. Well, what are your thoughts about the man who's been given that top job, Wamkele Mene? He certainly seems up for the job, given his experience at the WTO, as well as, of course, South Africa's trade ministry. He's also, of course, led South Africa's negotiations on the CFTA. So is his experience enough to take on a job that certainly will demand some delicate negotiation and, of course, resolution?
No, it's, absolutely. His experience sits well and his qualifications sit well. And I think being able to sit from the vantage point of the WTO, I think it's again the trade, this trade, the Pan-African Trade Organization needs to be able to have relationships with other trade blocs, such as the European Union and also the WTO itself. And so it's actually important that is cemented. So certainly he's very well qualified. He needs the strongest support possible and good resources. Certainly the aspiration is to build a world-class secretariat, and that's obviously his immediate first job at hand.
Well, the whole continent will certainly be watching him closely. Many thanks for joining us, Mr. Hart. That was Chris Hart, an economic analyst, joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now to Zimbabwe. The country says sanctions imposed on it by Western countries are making it hard to develop much-needed energy projects. President Emmerson Mnangagwa says a shift to clean energy in the country is difficult due to a lack of finance. He was speaking at the Third Africa Business Forum hosted by the UN Economic Commission on Africa, or for Africa, in Addis Ababa. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoyi has more on that.
These leaders are developing a strategy to see Africa shift towards clean energy. But Zimbabwe says it is unable to do so due to lack of funding.
If we had no sanctions, we would speak about attracting investment into the country. But because of the constraints of sanctions on us, we depend on our own domestic resources in the country, and also from the private sector, global private sector, who are not constrained by the sanctions imposed on us.
But even for countries which don't face that problem, it is still difficult to attract funding for clean energy projects.
The first thing is to really look at the progressive nature of our tax system. Because again, a lot of governments would say, oh, we can't pay for it, we can't afford it. The second one, and it's something that we did in Senegal, is essentially, and it's the same in France and many other countries, you have to criminalize non-payment of tariffs. Because the reason governments subsidize is because nobody pays the energy bill. And so when the energy bill is not paid, the government has to step in. When the government steps in, the utility falls.
But climate change activists say there also needs to be a focus on education.
Part of our model at Little Ones Go Green is to make sure that while we are thinking changes, let's start with the children at a nascent age. Because once you inculcate it in them at a tender age, then by the time they are working for the UN, working for so many other non-state actors or conglomerates and corporate companies, the mentality will have changed. They will have grown with an inculcation of thinking about conservation.
The UN Economic Commission for Africa is helping willing African countries to access financing for clean energy projects. The UN Economic Commission for Africa is creating dialogue between African public and private sectors so that member states can get financiers of mega energy projects. Economic experts advise government to create relevant incentives and more favorable investment policies that will encourage private sector to take the risk to venture into the energy investment. Coletta Wanjoyi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, now let's take a look at some corporate headlines today. Foreign exchange bureaus in Burundi will be facing a tough time after Burundi's central bank has suspended the licenses of all of those bureaus in the Central African nation in order to weed out those who are flouting official exchange rates. Now, Burundi has experienced a shortage of foreign exchange since 2015 after a political crisis that started when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced in April that year that he will seek a third term in office. And Egypt's central bank governor says that Egypt is in talks with the International Monetary Fund about technical assistance regarding structural reforms. Governor Tariq Amer says that the priority is to grow the economy. The country signed a 3-year, $12 billion extended fund facility in November 2016 after allowing its currency to weaken sharply. It implemented a value-added tax and raised fuel prices to reduce its balance of payments, budget, and deficits. And Nigeria will get a grant of more than $1 million from the U.S. government for technical and financial work on a power plant project in the capital, Abuja. The money will go towards the 1,350 megawatt NNPC Abuja Independent Power Project plant, and NNPC will work with U.S. firms GE and Continuum Associates. And lastly, Daimler has reported its biggest drop in annual profits in a decade, a 64% drop as Mercedes-Benz pushes into electric and hybrid vehicles. Mercedes saw record sales to retain its title as the world's top-selling premium automaker, but net profit fell to 2.7 billion euros from 7.6 billion, and of course hurt by 4.2 billion euros in charges related to diesel-related probes and legal proceedings. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let us head into a short break now, still to come. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization warns of serious threats on food as locusts spread in East Africa. And days of Nigeria depending on oil revenue numbered as more car manufacturers turn to electric cars.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairo. Hello, Nairo.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to Kenya now. Thousands of people turned up for a memorial service for Kenya's second president, Daniel Arap Moi, who passed away last week. Several heads of state from the region and representatives from numerous countries were in attendance to pay their last respects to the man who ruled Kenya for 24 years before willingly giving up power. CGTN's Robert Nagila with more.
18 years after he stepped down from power, the hearse carrying the body of former President Daniel Arap Moi brought him back to State House for one last time for visiting dignitaries to pay their last respects. It was here that the former statesman had ruled the country before relinquishing power at the advent of multi-party politics. The procession then slowly snaked its way to the Nyayo National Stadium, packed to capacity for a memorial service, attended by 7 foreign leaders, among them Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and Sahel Work-Zewed, President of Ethiopia. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta led the leaders in eulogizing Moi.
Fellow Kenyans, on some of the darkest days in our country's history, President Moi's resolute strength calmed the nation.
We will always remember the fundamental role that he has played in the formation of our regional organization, IGAD, back in 1986.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity to directly give to you our condolences.
He had solutions for challenges faced in Kenya and East Africa.
Moi was credited with keeping Kenya relatively stable in a troubled region and widely regarded for peace initiatives in the region. But he oversaw massive corruption, and under his watch, the economy stagnated, leaving many in poverty. Opposition to his rule was dealt with brutally. Moi died on February 4th following a long illness. The government declared a 3-day mourning period with his body lying in state at the parliament buildings, where hundreds of thousands paid their last respects. He will be buried on his farm in Kabarak next to his wife, about 250 kilometers from Nairobi. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's move on now. The UN Food and Agricultural Organization says that the Horn of Africa region faces an unprecedented threat to food security and livelihoods. Now, swarms of locusts continue to increase in Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya. This is the worst locust situation in Somalia and Ethiopia have seen in 25 years. The last time Kenya was affected with an infestation of this scale was about 70 years ago. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro reporting.
The plague of locusts has already caused extensive damage in several East African countries. In Kenya, the swarms have spread to 14 counties just kilometers away from neighboring Uganda and South Sudan. On Monday, a Ugandan government official said they had started spraying swarms of desert locusts that invaded the country over the weekend in a bid to tackle the major threat to livestock and key crops such as coffee. Somalia, on the other hand, is the first country in the region to declare a state of emergency over the infestation.
We were in Kenya 2 weeks ago. We have seen large swarms of locusts. For that, what we need to do is aerial spraying. What we saw here this morning is upper bands, so they are not flying yet. For that, we can do ground control operations. So there is a variety of tools that we have at our disposal to do these control operations. The problem we have in the region is that the planting season will occur very soon. It will start April, May in most of the countries. It means that if we are not able to control locust population for the moment, there will be a huge impact on the forthcoming planting season.
Food crops and livestock forage in the three countries are being heavily impacted. The swarms are uncommonly large and can consume huge amounts of crops and forage. Across East Africa, 19 million people are already facing severe acute food insecurity, and experts have warned that this will get worse as this is a key season for pastoralists and farmers. FAO is raising funds and surging experts and supplies to affected countries to boost locust control measures. The FAO has appealed for $76 million to help combat the locusts, but says it has only received $19 million from donors so far.
It's time for the international community to understand that it is an issue that needs to be dealt with now. Otherwise, we will turn a situation of a plague. There will be high level of acute food insecurity. There will be a million more people that will require food assistance, and it will take us years to control this situation.
The desert locust is the most dangerous migratory pest in the world. A locust swarm of 1 square kilometer can eat the same amount of food in one day as 35,000 people. Another round of locust breeding has now begun in all three most affected countries. Left unchecked, and given the additional rain season expected, an enabler of desert locust reproduction, the scale of the upsurge could grow 500 times by June. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, Africa's top oil producer, Nigeria, could lose billions of dollars in crude oil revenue as one of its biggest customers looks to end the sale of petrol and diesel cars. Nigeria exports up to $2.3 billion worth of crude oil to the UK annually, but the UK government now says it's working towards ending the sale of petrol, diesel and hybrid vehicles by the year 2035. Here's CGTN's Phili Haza with more.
Vehicles in Nigeria are mostly made of petrol and diesel engines. But the odds are against these kind of cars as the world tries to combat effects of climate change. Efforts are now in place in some parts of Nigeria to assemble cars that don't burn fuel. Nigeria is set to receive its first set of solar-powered cars next year, with 2 private firms already working on the project in Ibadan in the southwest of the country. They hope to begin a new era of phasing out fossil fuel vehicles in the country. The UK wants to achieve its target of emitting virtually zero carbon by 2050. The government wants to ban petrol cars in the next 15 years. Experts say a lot more needs to be done for Nigeria to join countries like UK in adopting electric vehicles.
We can say yes and no. Nigeria is not ready, but Nigeria can't work towards that. It is what we must do, because the Toyotas of this world, BMW and the Teslas, all of them, they are manufacturing electric cars. I think the movement has started. So I only advise government to intensify efforts, towards this, because UK has started. Some other countries will do that very soon, and will not have any choice than to be in line with what is global in nature.
Nigeria exports up to $2.3 billion worth of crude oil to the UK annually, according to the United Nations Comtrade database on international trade. The country's economy is largely dependent on sales of crude oil, and the ban of petrol vehicles by the UK will mean the country may lose one of its major customers. Economic analysts say the Nigerian government will need to take steps to prevent any serious economic implications from the UK's decision.
If one customer is pulling out, we'll look for another market. Definitely it will affect us in the short time, no doubt about that, but we'll get used to it. The major thing is that Nigeria must intensify effort to diversify this economy. We must, show so much interest in agriculture. We have so many other mineral resources. We have bitumen. We have so many that we are not even, exploring for now. So we must look in that direction.
In addition, the fast-spreading coronavirus from China is also threatening Nigeria's primary source of revenue, as the Asian country has reduced its imports in the last 2 months. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari in May last year said the government has made significant efforts in diversifying the country's economy away from crude oil and focusing more on non-oil dependent sources of revenue. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
And South Africa's Exxaro Resources will officially hand over its Arno mine to its former employees in mid-February. This handover started to take place in May last year when Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, officially handed over a 50% shareholding to former Arno coal employees. Here's Angelo Coppola with more.
At the time, the Minerals Minister said that the handover was an industry milestone because it included workers as meaningful, beneficial stakeholders in a mine that had been closed for 4 years.
Feeling so good because I've never owned anything, and now today I am a shareholder in a big company as Arnold Op.
The South African mining industry has been in the doldrums for some time, and unions have been battling management on retrenchments for that time. At the moment, there are retrenchment discussions with 4 mines.
And then suddenly to come to an opening of a mine is something that we haven't been to or seen for nearly a decade. So it's just this absolutely wonderful occasion, and it's a memorable occasion to deal with something positive for a change.
Black economic empowerment has been through several iterations. Could this be the one that ignites economic growth?
We'll study this model, and we believe that this model is going to be the way to go going forward. It means that workers should participate not only in giving their labor to the highest bidder, but also building the company for the interest of their children and grandchildren.
The new mine owners have a huge job ahead of them, but by working as a team, they maintain everything can be accomplished.
The next milestone for us is to put coal on the belt. That's the main thing. As you've heard earlier, the mine has been closed for 4 years. So there's a bit of dismantlement that they've done. Some of the infrastructure is quite damaged. So our goal as a company for the next 10 to 12 months is to refurbish all the infrastructure that's been dismantled and get us to produce coal as early as the first quarter of next year.
I am ready. I am ready because I understand it's not only for the benefit of her, it's for the benefit of us. So that is why we have to be combined and work together and make sure that this thing, it goes off the ground and becomes successful.
This mine reopening is about second chances. It's also the opportunity to try and get broad-based black economic empowerment running the right way so that everybody involved in this mine benefits. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN Mpumalanga, South Africa.
You are watching Global Business Africa. We're taking a quick break now, but still coming up. The World Health Organization begins meeting to accelerate research into drugs and vaccines for the coronavirus. And we take a look at how the market for electric vehicles is shaping up.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
At just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. Sudan's leaders have agreed to hand over former longtime President Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. This emerged during peace talks between Sudan's government and rebel groups from the Darfur region. Bashir was overthrown by the military last year amid a public uprising. He is wanted by the ICC for crimes against humanity and war crimes in connection to the Darfur conflict, which left at least 300,000 people dead. And the Vice President of Equatorial Guinea, Théodore Obiang, has been handed a $33 million fine by a Parisian court. Obiang, who is also the son of the country's long-serving leader, Teodoro Obiang Nguema, was found guilty of embezzling public funds. Now, the court gave Obiang a suspended jail term and ordered the confiscation of his assets. The 50-year-old Obiang challenged his 2017 conviction, but the appeals court gave him an even heavier sentence. And Malian President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta says authorities are prepared to enter talks with jihadist groups. It's in the hopes of ending an insurgency that has made swathes of the country ungovernable. Now, human rights groups say last year alone, at least 456 civilians were killed and hundreds more wounded in central Mali. And the government in Egypt has announced that the population has hit the 100 million mark. The capital, Cairo, has 10 million people. The announcement was made by state statistics agency CAPMES, sending many Egyptians into excitement. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, the World Health Organization has begun a two-day meeting which is aimed at accelerating research into drugs, diagnostics and vaccines into the novel coronavirus. Now, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said an international community of researchers has been established in laboratories around the world.
Rarely have so many of the world's leading scientists and medical experts arrived at the World Health Organization in Geneva with a clearer or more pressing mission. With the death toll from COVID-19 still rising, their ambition is to finalize a clear roadmap over these 2 days to identify gaps in their knowledge, learn more about the specifics of this virus, and above all, to decide the best way to develop medicines and ultimately a vaccine which will defeat it. The clear message from the leadership of the WHO was that China's robust response to the crisis had given the rest of the world a breathing space, but time was of the essence.
If you see the number of cases in China and the rest of the world, it's not even comparable. And the opportunity was created because of the serious measures that China is taking in Wuhan and the other affected provinces. That is slowing the spread of the virus to the rest of the world. But I don't think this status can stay the same for long. That's why we have to use the current window of opportunity to hit hard and stand in unison to fight this virus in every corner.
An international community of researchers has been established in laboratories around the world who are sharing data and expertise. But the WHO said it could take up to 18 months before a safe, effective vaccine could be produced, and in the meantime, everyone must continue to adopt basic hygiene.
Dr. Tedros said his biggest fear was that this deadly virus could get into a country with a fragile healthcare system. He said so far the strong response of China had effectively protected the rest of the world from the worst of its effects, but that might not last. And he said if it did get into such a country, there could be pandemonium. He said this sort of virus had the capacity to inflict more damage than any terrorist action, and it should therefore be regarded as public enemy number one. Mark Webster, CGTN, Geneva.
Now, as the epidemic continues in China, the world's second largest economy faces a daunting task. Maintaining growth, jobs and financing for companies are all high priorities. Well, CGTN's Omar Khan sat down with one foreign business owner who talks about how his operation feels the pressure from all angles.
Silence fills this usually busy warehouse industrial park on the outskirts of Shenzhen. Inside, piles of stocked goods capture how many industries are affected by the coronavirus outbreak. Hearing this company's business model and target customer base, one can imagine how difficult the current reality is.
For us, our major market is the end consumer. We deal with brokers, we do B2B and B2C. Okay, so this is a significant part of all of our business here in China. And most of the market is focused on the China market. We don't do much export at all. So we buy in China from various parts of China, and we also ship across different parts of China.
For Canadian-Australian Stephen Budisa, who first came to China in 1989, his business depends entirely on a brisk, fully functioning economy. But as of right now, he is facing difficulties.
We didn't anticipate this happening, so we didn't build up our inventory. We didn't plan to carry inventory. And so what's going to happen now is when we start getting orders, if they do come, we're going to be short on many of the products that we have in the warehouse. So if we place an order now with the vendor, most of them are saying, we don't have any workers here. That's a big concern for us.
Budisa believes costs will be felt across numerous industries and sectors, especially in such an integrated economy like China's.
So even though your employees aren't coming back, you're still paying your overheads, which is the rent. You're still paying for your base pay, which is for your employees, yet you've got no orders on this side. This is a big concern. So the burden is actually being carried on the shoulders of most of the business owners.
But like so many other businesses across the country, putting health and safety first is the obvious approach.
There's an economic sacrifice and there's a human sacrifice. At the moment, I think it's important to focus on people, and there's a lot of people and families that are being hit by this. And I don't want to be the person that says, hey, come back to work. I think it's important to look after the people aspect, but at one turning point, there's got to be a turning point. Okay, when is our environment safe? And at that point, the government has to step in and say, hey, everyone come back to work.
As for the foreigner's view on the government's response, he voices support for what's been done thus far.
I think it's everyone's responsibility to follow the instructions set by the government. And I think everyone has, and I think the whole population of China has supported the government, and the government has put in really good measures to control the coronavirus.
Omar Khan, CGTN, Shenzhen.
Meanwhile, Chinese authorities have briefed the public on the epidemic control, as well as factory production resumption. Officials from China's top economic planner, the National Development and Reform Commission, say most key industries in the country are now getting back to work after an extended Lunar New Year break, and that's due, of course, to the coronavirus.
Provinces outside Hubei are starting to reopen their businesses, especially the manufacture of key medical supplies, energy, food, and transportation. According to the latest figures yesterday from 22 provinces, 76% of mask producers have returned to work, and the number is 77% for protective suit producers, 94.6% for producers and processors for food, and 57.8% for coal miners. Natural gas, electricity, and petroleum products are in sufficient supply, and transportation systems are running normally.
Now, company employees were supposed to show up for work in China on Monday after the extended holiday. But with the virus epidemic continuing to spread, a lot of firms are now telling their staff to work from home for a while. They've been asking employees to download remote working apps from one of several companies. As a result, the stock value of those companies have taken off big time. Here's CGTN's UN with that story.
Cici Fu has been working from home since last Monday. The company she works for uses corporate WeChat to connect its employees. And since Cici and her colleagues have been long working in different locations, they're used to communicating via online platforms. She knows the pros and the cons.
WeChat will have less function to support your work. For example, the corporate WeChat may transform large files more quickly. But the biggest advantage is that you don't have to commute from home to office. Working from home has a main problem is that your internet connection at home is not as stable or as fast as in the office.
According to Sina Finance, nearly 200 million people nationwide were using online work apps on February 3rd, when the country was originally supposed to resume work following the Spring Festival. 2 days later, remote working app DingTalk for the first time overtook WeChat to rank first in the iOS App Store's list of popular downloads. Alibaba-backed DingTalk has been shoring up its IT infrastructure ever since the virus outbreak, and can now allow as many as 300 people to attend an online meeting at the same time.
We have offered solutions to the problems of remote working. For example, we try to ensure real-time communication and cooperation, as well as allowing our team to sync up projects. And employees can fill in their health status on our platform as well.
Intensive demand for remote working has been reflected in the capital market as well. As of yesterday, related A-shares have gained more than 25% over the past week. Still, it's worthwhile for investors to be aware of what's really been driving the bull market.
This robust performance has largely been fueled by speculation. I think related stocks will cool down once the hot money flows to another topic or there is a swing in the overall market. Still, I'm optimistic about longer-term growth of remote working, given that it can be a key application for the 5G plus internet.
The China market for mobile work apps was worth about 23 billion yuan in 2018, and estimates say that is expected to grow to 48 billion by 2024, an annual expansion rate of over 18%. And those estimates were made before the coronavirus hit. UNICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, let's shift focus now. Barcelona's deputy mayor, Jaume Collboni, says the Mobile World Congress is scheduled to take place normally despite coronavirus fears. Now, the announcement comes after Sony Corporation on Monday became the fifth company to pull out from the event. Event organizers say that no one from China's Hubei province, where the coronavirus outbreak began, would be allowed to attend. Visitors from China must also prove they have been outside the country for at least 2 weeks prior to the event. The MWC is estimated to have boosted the local Barcelona economy by around $515 million last year. The International Telecoms Conference, which attracts more than 100,000 visitors, is due to take place on February 24th to 27th.
The Mobile World Congress organizers, GSMA, are determined, and so they're telling us to keep the event in the scheduled dates. And about the administration, the government, the Generalitat, and Barcelona City Hall, we're giving everything from our side so that the event goes on as normal, from the security and public transport's points of view, and also from the sanitary and health measures we would eventually adopt following the health authorities' criteria.
Well, let's talk cars now. Electric cars are stealing the show at the Auto Expo 2020 near Delhi. Almost every manufacturer there is featuring battery-powered vehicles. That's because Indian car manufacturers are betting on a bright future for eco-friendly electric cars. But of course, price sensitivity and lack of infrastructure keeps electric car buyers mostly at bay. A report by ratings agency ICRA Limited showed that only 3 to 5% of Indian passenger vehicles will be electric by 2025. Experts also say higher prices for electric vehicles was one reason behind the slow growth. They point to inadequate public charging infrastructure as another factor. Meanwhile, it is gearing up to be a big year in electric vehicles, with a host of companies expected to introduce new cars. Mark New takes a look at how the market is shaping up.
During America's most watched TV event, the Super Bowl, Porsche, Audi, Hummer, and Ford all teased new electric vehicles coming soon. In the U.S., nearly half of all EV sales are made in California. Asha Weinstein Agrawal of the Mineta Transportation Institute recently bought a used Tesla electric car.
Let's be honest, most of the country they're still a rarity. But I think that, any trend has to start somewhere. Once EVs become, roughly comparable in terms of cost, I think the range and the reliability is largely, it's not gone, but pretty much gone.
Weinstein Agrawal says one disadvantage to EV growth in the U.S. is low gas prices.
In the United States, as compared to Europe and some other parts of the world, is that frankly gas is very cheap here, and that's largely a matter of tax policy.
But the U.S. still has a long way to go. It had 1.1 million EV vehicles on the road at the end of 2018, while Europe had 1.2 million. China, though, well out in front with 2.3 million units. It also accounted for nearly half of the global EV stock.
China is such a larger market, and the government has been very progressive in terms of promoting EVs, and that's, I think, helped the market quite a bit. Plus, they have a broader range of models.
Coates says 2020 could be a watershed moment for the industry, with the Rivian electric pickup to be manufactured in the U.S. and the arrival of electric SUVs from Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz. But Coates says the only real EV success story has been the Model 3 from Tesla, which just launched a manufacturing plant in Shanghai.
The China market is driving global EV development. Virtually all of the Western car companies and the Asian car companies have ventures in China very focused on electric vehicles. GM introduced 2 new electric vehicles in China that are not available in the U.S. The great thing about China and EVs is you've got the full supply chain there.
Coates says interdependence makes the EV industry susceptible to becoming a trade war bargaining chip. But for some, the potential reward is well worth the risky moves. Mark New, CGTN, Palo Alto, California.
And turning now to the markets, let's check in on commodity prices today. Gold prices edging back from the previous day's near one-week high, as of course the dollar hit a 4-month peak today. The drop in the number of new confirmed cases of coronavirus also provided a glimmer of hope and support for gold prices. Meanwhile, oil prices rising to $54 a barrel. They recovered from a 13-month low. as, of course, the drop in new cases of coronavirus eased some of those concerns about a lasting hit to oil demand. But investors still remain wary that China's oil demand could take a further hit if, of course, the coronavirus cannot be contained and if OPEC and its allies fail to agree on further steps to support prices going forward. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. An unmanned aerial vehicle turns round fortunes for a Nigerian farmer.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
And in Nigeria, a startup is using technology to help farmers in the country improve their yields and make more money in the process. Now, the company is using drones to spray pesticides and to help to map farmlands for better crop rotation and management. More and more farmers in Nigeria are now turning to technology to improve their farming operations. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on that.
A scene like this used to be a rarity in Nigeria's agricultural landscape, but things are now changing. Farmers are now fast embracing the idea of engaging drones to help improve their yields and make farming generally less stressful. And it's mainly thanks to this young man, Confidence Odinye, whose tech startup is helping to change the face of farming in the country.
When we came in, we reduced their costs of spraying, their frequency of spraying from 6 times in a farming cycle for a 90-day crop harvest, that which is rice, to 2 times. And we reduced their spending from 5x to just 3x. Now, what that meant was, they were able to harvest close to 90% of every single seed that was planted on the ground, as opposed to 40 and sometimes 50% that they harvested and they have been harvesting in the previous years.
Odinye founded BitDrone in 2014 after graduating from one of Nigeria's leading technology institutions with a degree in civil engineering. He says he started the business out of a need to solve Nigeria's challenges in line with the Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2, ending hunger and poverty. BitDrone is now helping Nigerian farmers simplify farming and improve their yield by providing spray operations, land mapping, crop health inspection and surveillance, all using drones. So far, they've helped several farmers scale operations on over 60,000 hectares of farmlands in 22 states and are set to help even more farmers through a new partnership with the Rice Farmers Association of Nigeria.
What this will do now is to, one, ensure that these farmers meet the capacity for food, because the drone ensures improving harvest yield, and by the time they can meet our demand for food, then they will make enough money. Secondly, the drone will reduce costs of operation, so that means that they're no longer selling the rice above market value so as to meet the loss in crops or high rates of operations that have affected the cost of the rice. They can now sell at a very affordable rate and still make huge profit.
Though there were concerns that replacing humans with drones and other technological innovations may be creating unemployment, Confidence argues otherwise.
Our traditional means of farming is outdated and it's not working. So why not implement technology and create other role for jobs for these individuals? I mean, Someone who is spraying with his hand can now control a drone because you need two people to control a spray drone. Secondly, someone who is engaging in crop inspection can now use a drone to engage in crop inspection. We hire engineers to program these drones. We hire engineers to repair the drones when they're damaged. We hire people to carry out the drones from point A to point B in terms of logistics. So there are much more job opportunities that will be opened for people in the drone technology as opposed to them being on the farm manually spraying themselves.
Drone has over 16 drones, all imported from China. But Odinia says he's working to establish a drone manufacturing center in Nigeria that will produce 3,000 drones every year to aid not just agriculture, but also entertainment, security and inspection of oil and gas installations. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, in Cape Town, South Africa, a restaurant has just set an unusual Guinness World Record. Gibson's Burgers and Ribs set the record for the most varieties of milkshakes commercially available. CGTN's Astor Toll tells us how milkshakes have helped this establishment set themselves apart from their competitors.
If there's one thing Gibson's Gourmet Burgers and Ribs knows how to make, it's milkshakes. With over 207 milkshakes to choose from, customers are given a diverse offering.
When we initially opened up the restaurant, we had about 40 milkshakes, and because they were so popular, it became 100, 150, then 200, then 207. So it happened over a period of 5 years.
Well, the 5-year journey earned them a place in the Guinness World Book of Records. The restaurant holds a title for most variety of milkshakes commercially available.
We saw a Facebook ad about the Guinness Book of World Records that over 207 milkshakes, so we decided to come here today. It exceeded my expectations so much, like I'm going to come here as soon as possible again to try out every single milkshake as far as I can, because it just looks amazing.
For the staff of Gibson's Gourmet Burgers and Ribs, there's only one thing left to do. Create even more unique milkshakes. Astor Toll, CGTN.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand was into its second day of gains as global risk sentiment improved while investors await manufacturing and unemployment data later today. The local currency was the best performing amongst emerging market currencies, tracked by Bloomberg on Tuesday. It traded below the psychologically important 15 rand per dollar level for a second day. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling weakening due to increased dollar demand from merchandise importers and, of course, some multinational companies. And that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.